The night was colder than it had any right to be. Winter had come early to the borderlands, that forsaken stretch between the northern territories and the rogue wilds where exiles went to die, and no pack claimed the frozen ground. In the ruins of what had once been a trading post, now little more than crumbling stone walls and rotted timber, Lyra huddled against the wind with her daughter pressed tight to her chest. The cub was 3 years old, too young to shift, too small to understand why her mama's arms trembled, why her belly ached with hunger, why the world had grown so cold. "Mama," Kira whimpered, her small face buried against Lyra's neck. "I'm cold." "I know, little star," Lyra whispered, though her own voice shook. "I know." She had nothing left to give. No food, no fire, not even a blanket to wrap around her daughter's shivering body. Only the thin, tattered dress she wore, too thin for winter, stained with dirt and blood from the journey, and her own failing body heat. 3 days since they'd been cast out. 3 days since her own pack, the Silverpine pack, the only family she'd ever known, had dragged her to the border and thrown her across the line like refuse. "Omega trash," the beta had snarled, his boot on her back as she'd crawled in the mud. "You and your bastard cub. You're not pack anymore." She'd begged. Gods, how she'd begged. "Please, she's just a child. She'll die out here." "Should have thought of that before you spread your legs for a rogue," the beta spat. "Alpha's orders. You're banished. Both of you." They'd left her there, bleeding, broken, clutching her terrified daughter, left them to freeze, left them to starve, left them to die. And now, 3 days later, Lyra was watching her daughter fade. Kira's lips had turned blue. Her small body had stopped shivering an hour ago. A bad sign. The worst sign. When the body stopped fighting the cold, death wasn't far behind. Lyra pressed her face to her daughter's hair, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, little star. Mama tried. I tried so hard." "Mama," Kira's voice was barely a breath. "It hurts." "I know, baby. I know." The ruins weren't empty. Others had gathered here. Rogues, exiles, the desperate and the damned. Most kept to themselves, huddled around small fires they guarded jealously. But some watched. A group of rogue males, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They'd been circling closer all evening, drawn by the scent of an unmated Omega. Lyra had tried to hide it, tried to mask her scent with mud and ash, but nothing could completely suppress what she was. And they knew. One of them, a scarred wolf with cruel eyes, stepped closer. "Cold night for a pretty little Omega," he said, voice oily. "And her cub." Lyra's arms tightened around Kira. "Stay back." He laughed. "Or what? You'll fight me? You can barely stand." Another rogue joined him, grinning. "We could help you, Omega. Keep you warm. Feed the cub." His gaze raked over her. "For a price." Lyra's stomach turned. She knew what price they meant. But when Kira whimpered again, when her daughter's small body went limp in her arms, something in Lyra broke. She looked down at her cub, her beautiful, innocent daughter who'd done nothing to deserve this, and made a choice that shattered her soul. Slowly, Lyra stood. Her legs shook, barely supporting her weight. The rogues watched, hungry, waiting. Lyra's voice came out broken, barely more than a whisper. "Please." She swallowed, forcing the words past her throat. "I have nothing to offer. No food, no coin. But I'll—" Her voice cracked. "I'll give you whatever you want. Just, please, give my daughter a blanket. Something warm. Please." She held Kira out slightly, the cub's small form limp in her arms. "Take her. Keep her warm. Just for tonight. I'll do anything you want. Anything. Just don't let her freeze." The words tasted like ash, like betrayal, like the death of everything she'd ever been. But Kira was dying, and Lyra would damn herself to save her. The scarred rogue's grin widened. "Anything?" "Anything," Lyra whispered, tears streaming down her face. He stepped closer, reaching for Kira. "No." The voice cut through the night like a blade. Deep, commanding, carrying weight that made every rogue in the ruins freeze. Lyra's head snapped up. A man stepped from the shadows. No, not a man. A wolf. An alpha. Even in human form, his dominance was unmistakable. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a torn traveling cloak that did little to hide the warrior's build beneath. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, some sections braided with silver beads. His face was hard, scarred, weathered by years she couldn't count. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Gold, pure molten gold, ringed with silver. Alpha eyes, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. The scarred rogue straightened, suddenly wary. "This doesn't concern you, stranger. Move along." The Alpha didn't look at him. His gaze remained locked on Lyra and the cub in her arms. "The Omega," he said quietly. "What did she offer you?" The rogue sneered. "A night with her. Fair trade for a blanket, don't you think?" "No." The Alpha's voice dropped lower, colder. "I don't." He moved forward. Not fast, not aggressive, but with such absolute certainty that the rogues actually stepped back. The Alpha stopped in front of Lyra. This close, she could smell him. Pine and snow and something wild, something ancient. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Her Omega instinct screamed at her to submit, to drop her eyes, to bare her throat. Yes, but she was too tired, too broken, too desperate. She just stared at him, clutching her dying daughter, waiting for whatever came next. The Alpha's gaze dropped to Kira. His expression, hard as stone a moment before, softened. "How long has she been like this?" His voice was gentler now, meant only for Lyra. 2 hours, Lyra whispered. "Maybe 3. She stopped shivering. I don't know how much time she has left." The Alpha reached up and unfastened his cloak. In one fluid motion, he wrapped it around Kira's small body, lifting the cub from Lyra's arms before she could protest. Kira made a small sound, not fear, but relief, as warmth enveloped her. "Your offer," the Alpha said, his eyes meeting Lyra's again. "I refuse it." Her breath caught. "What?" "No one," he said, voice hard as iron, "should have to trade themselves for their child's life." He turned to the scarred rogue, and his expression went glacial. "Touch her again, and I'll rip your throat out. All of you. Understood?" The rogues backed away quickly, melting into the shadows. Smart. The Alpha turned back to Lyra. "Come with me." She swayed on her feet, exhaustion and shock hitting her all at once. "I have nothing to pay you with. I didn't ask for payment." His free hand caught her arm, steadying her. "I said, come with me." Lyra stared at him. At this stranger, this Alpha, who'd appeared from nowhere and wrapped her dying daughter in warmth. Why? The word barely escaped her lips. For a long moment, the Alpha didn't answer. Then quietly, "Because I remember being cold once, and I remember wishing someone would help." Kira stirred in his arms, her small hand clutching his cloak. Her eyes, golden like her mother's, blinked open. She looked at the Alpha's face, so close to hers, and whispered, "Warm." Something flickered in the Alpha's eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or memory. "Yes," he said gently. "Warm." He looked at Lyra. "There's a cabin. 2 miles north. Fire, food, beds. You'll both be safe there." Safe. The word sounded foreign. Lyra couldn't remember the last time she'd been safe, but when she looked at her daughter, already regaining color in her cheeks, already breathing easier, the decision made itself. "Okay," Lyra whispered. "Okay." The Alpha nodded once, then turned and began walking. Lyra followed on trembling legs. Behind them, the ruins faded into darkness. The rogues watched but didn't follow. Even they weren't stupid enough to chase prey claimed by an Alpha like that. As they walked through the frozen night, Kira nestled safely in the stranger's arms. Lyra felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Not safety, Not yet. But hope. The smallest, most dangerous spark of hope. The cabin appeared through the trees like a dream. Small but sturdy, built from dark wood and stone. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line, promising warmth within. Lyra's steps faltered. She'd expected, she didn't know what. A camp, maybe. A temporary shelter. Not this. Not a home. The Alpha pushed open the door with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the cub in his arms. Warmth spilled out, and Lyra gasped. Inside, a fire burned bright in a stone hearth. Furs covered a bed in the corner. Shelves held jars of preserved food, dried meat, herbs. A table stood in the center with 2 rough-hewn chairs. It was simple, sparse even. To Lyra, it looked like a palace. Kira made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and reached for the fire with both hands. The Alpha carried her to the hearth and settled her on a thick fur rug. He tucked his cloak tighter around her small body, then added more wood to the fire. Lyra stood in the doorway, unable to move. This couldn't be real. It was too perfect. Too kind. Men like him didn't exist. Alphas like him didn't exist. There had to be a catch, a price, a trap. The Alpha glanced back at her. You can come in, or you can freeze out there. Your choice. His tone was dry, almost amused. Lyra forced her feet to move. She stepped across the threshold, and warmth hit her like a physical force. Her knees buckled. The Alpha caught her before she hit the floor, one hand steadying her elbow. Easy, he said. When was the last time you ate? I don't... Her head spun. 4 days? 5? He cursed under his breath and guided her to one of the chairs. Sit. Lyra sat, her body trembling now that she'd stopped moving. The Alpha moved to the hearth, where a pot hung over the fire. He ladled thick stew into 2 wooden bowls, then set one in front of Kira and one in front of Lyra. Eat, he said simply. Kira didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the bowl with both hands and drank directly from it, too hungry for a spoon. Lyra stared at her bowl. The smell alone made her stomach clench painfully. It's not poisoned, the Alpha said, stood reading her hesitation. And I didn't ask you here to hurt you. Then why? The question burst from her. Why did you help us? What do you want? The Alpha leaned against the table, arms crossed. His golden eyes studied her face. What do I want? He repeated slowly. I want a mother not to have to offer herself for a blanket. I want a cub not to freeze to death because the world is cruel. That's what I want. Lyra's throat closed. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He pushed the bowl closer to her. Eat. You're no good to your daughter if you collapse. Lyra lifted the bowl with shaking hands and took a sip. The stew was rich, warm, perfectly seasoned. It spread through her chest like liquid fire, chasing away the cold that had lived in her bones for days. She drank more, then more, where when the bowl was empty, she looked up to find the Alpha watching her with an unreadable expression. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned to Kira. The cub had finished her stew and was already drowsing by the fire, wrapped in his cloak like a cocoon. She needs rest, the Alpha said. You both do. He moved to the bed and pulled back the furs. The cub sleeps here. You can take the other furs by the fire. Lyra blinked. And you? I'll keep watch. You can't. You need to rest, too. I've gone longer without sleep. His tone left no room for argument. Get your daughter to bed. Lyra wanted to protest, but exhaustion was dragging at her like chains. She went to Kira and scooped her up. The cub barely stirred, already half asleep. As Lyra tucked her daughter into the bed, the first real bed Kira had ever slept in, the cub's small hand caught hers. Mama? Kira whispered. Is he going to keep us? Lyra's breath caught. I don't know, little star. I hope so. Kira's eyes drifted shut. He's warm. Lyra stroked her daughter's hair until her breathing evened out into sleep. When she turned, the Alpha was standing by the door, rifle in hand, staring out into the darkness. "What's your name?" Lyra asked quietly. For a moment, she didn't think he'd answer. Then, "Kyle. Kyle," she repeated. The name felt solid, strong. "I'm Lyra. My daughter is Kira." "I know." Lyra frowned. "How? You told the rogues." He glanced back at her and something flickered in his eyes. "When you were begging them to save her, you said her name." "Kira." Lyra's chest tightened. He'd been watching even then, listening. "Why didn't you step in sooner?" The question came out sharper than she meant. Cale's jaw tightened. "I had to know how far they'd go, how far you'd go." His gaze held hers. "Now I know." "And what did you learn?" "That you'd burn the world for her." His voice softened, just barely. "That's a mother worth protecting." Lyra's throat closed. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. She lay down on the furs by the fire, pulling them around herself. From this angle she could see both Kira sleeping peacefully in the bed, and Cale standing guard by the door. For the first time in 3 days, maybe longer, Lyra felt something loosen in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. As sleep pulled her under, she heard Cale whisper something into the darkness. "Not again. I won't let it happen again." And though she didn't understand what he meant, Lyra believed him. Chapter 2. The Truth in Daylight. Lyra woke to the smell of cooking meat. For a moment she forgot where she was. Panic seized her, the ruins, the cold, Kira dying in her arms. Then she opened her eyes and saw the cabin. The fire, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the bed. Safe. They were safe. Lyra sat up slowly, her body aching from days of sleeping on frozen ground. The furs had kept her warm through the night, warmer than she'd been in months. Cale stood at the hearth, turning strips of meat over the fire. He'd shed his cloak, revealing a simple tunic and leather vest that did nothing to hide the warrior's build beneath. He glanced at her. "You're awake. You didn't sleep." It wasn't a question. The shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He'd been on watch all night. "I'll sleep when I'm dead." His tone was matter of fact. Lyra pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. Kyle was at her side in an instant, steadying her with one hand. "Easy. You're still weak." His hand was warm on her arm. Solid. Real. Up close, Lyra could see the scars on his face more clearly, a thin line across his left cheek, another through his eyebrow. Marks of battles fought and survived. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Really?" Kyle's expression closed off. "Someone passing through." "Passing through with a fully stocked cabin." "I said I was passing through. Not that I don't stop sometimes." He released her arm and returned to the fire, pulling the cooked meat onto a wooden plate. Lyra's stomach growled at the sight. Kyle's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Sit. Eat." Lyra sat, and Kyle placed the plate in front of her, along with a hunk of dark bread. "What about you?" she asked. "I already ate." Lyra hesitated, then began eating. The meat was tender, perfectly seasoned. The bread was fresh. Fresh. She stopped mid-bite. "Where did you get fresh bread out here?" "I made it." Lyra stared at him. This massive, scarred alpha warrior. Baked bread. Cale's expression remained neutral. "I'm not completely useless domestically." That's not," Lyra shook her head. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me." "I can't. You saved our lives." "I opened a door and shared food." Cale's tone was dismissive. "That's not heroism. To us it is." Kyle didn't answer. He turned back to the fire, jaw tight. A small sound came from the bed. Kira stirring awake. The cub sat up, rubbing her eyes. When she saw where she was, her face lit up with a joy so pure it hurt to see. "Mama, we're still here." "Yes, little star," Lyra's voice caught. "We're still here." Kira scrambled out of bed and ran to Lyra, throwing her small arms around her mother's neck. "I'm not cold anymore," Kira whispered, "and my tummy doesn't hurt." Lyra held her daughter tight, tears streaming down her face. Kyle cleared his throat. There's more food. The cub should eat. Kira peeked at him, suddenly shy. You're the warm man? From last night. I have a name. It's Kale. Kyle, Kira repeated, testing it out. Then, asked with the fearlessness only children possess. Are you going to keep us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Kale's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or pain. That's not... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. That's up to your mother. Lyra's heart pounded. What does that mean? Kale met her gaze. It means you have a choice. You can stay here until you're strong enough to travel, then go wherever you want. Or, he paused, or you can stay. Stay, Lyra repeated numbly. Here, with you. Yes. Why would you offer that? Kale's jaw clenched. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then quietly, because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, and I know what it's like to wish someone had offered shelter when I needed it most. Lyra's breath caught. What happened to you? Kale's eyes went distant, shadowed with old grief. That's not a story for today. He turned away. Think about it. You don't have to decide now. But even as he spoke, Lyra knew her answer. She'd known it the moment he'd wrapped his cloak around Kira. The moment he'd refused her desperate offer. The moment he'd said no one should have to trade themselves for their child's life. This Alpha, this stranger, had shown her more kindness in one night than her own pack had in a lifetime. And Kira... Kira was looking at Kyle with eyes full of trust, like he was some kind of hero from the old stories. Kale, Lyra said softly. He turned back, guarded. If we stay, what would we be to you? The question was more loaded than it seemed, and they both knew it. An unmated Omega and her cub, each sheltered by a lone Alpha. There were implications there, expectations. Kale held her gaze steadily. You'd be under my protection. Nothing more, nothing less. His voice was firm. I'm not asking anything from you, Lyra. Not your body, not your submission, not your gratitude. Just, he glanced at Kira, something softening in his eyes. Just let me keep you safe. Lyra's throat closed. No one had ever offered her safety without a price. No one. Why? The word broke from her. Why do you care? Kyle was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. Because I had a family once, a mate, a daughter. His hands clenched into fists. And I wasn't there when they needed me. I couldn't save them. Lyra's heart stopped. They're gone, Kale continued, each word clearly costing him. And I can't bring them back. But I can, his voice cracked. I can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else, to you, to her. He looked at Kira, and Lyra saw it then, the ghost of his lost daughter in his eyes. I'm sorry, Lyra whispered. Don't be. Kyle's expression hardened again, walls slamming back into place. Just tell me if you're staying. Lyra looked at her daughter, fed, warm, safe for the first time in her short life. She looked at Kyle, this broken, grieving Alpha who was offering them a home when the rest of the world had thrown them away, and she made her choice. We'll stay. Something flickered in Kale's eyes, relief, maybe, or gratitude. He nodded once, sharp and final. Then welcome home. Kira let out a delighted squeal and launched herself at Kale, hugging his leg. Kale froze, clearly not expecting the gesture. For a moment he just stood there, awkward and uncertain. Then, slowly, his large hand came down to rest on Kira's small head. Thank you, the cub whispered. Thank you for keeping us. Kyle's throat worked. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. You're welcome, little one. And as Lyra watched them, this massive warrior and her tiny daughter, something shifted in her chest. For the first time since her pack had thrown her away, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd be okay. Chapter 3. The pack returns. 2 weeks passed in fragile peace. Lyra and Kira settled into the cabin like they'd always belonged there. Cale taught them the rhythms of his life, when to gather firewood, how to preserve meat, which herbs to pick from the forest. Kira bloomed under the routine. In her cheeks filled out, her eyes grew bright, her laughter rang through the cabin like bells. And Lyra? Lyra began to remember what it felt like to breathe without fear. She watched Cale with her daughter and saw gentleness she'd never expected from an alpha. He carved Kira little wooden animals by the fire. He told her stories of the old wars. He let her climb on his back like he was a mountain to be conquered. And with Lyra, he was careful. Always careful. He never touched her without permission. Never looked at her with hunger. Never made her feel like the debt she owed was anything but imaginary. It should have been a relief. Instead, Lyra found herself wishing he would look at her differently. That he would see her as more than a broken Omega he'd rescued. Because she was starting to see him as more than her savior, and she was starting to see him as something else. Something dangerous. On the 14th night, everything changed. Cale had gone out to check his traps, leaving Lyra and Kira alone in the cabin. Lyra was braiding her daughter's hair when Kira suddenly went rigid. "Mama," the cub whispered, "I smell wolves." Lyra's blood turned to ice. She grabbed Kira and pulled her close, nostrils flaring. Kira was right. Multiple wolves. Close. Coming closer. The door burst open. 5 wolves in human form stood in the doorway, all wearing the mark of the Silverpine Pack. The pack that had cast Lyra out. Leading them was Beta Garrett, the same male who'd thrown her across the border. His lips curled in a cruel smile. Well, well, the Omega trash survived after all. Lyra's arms tightened around Kira. "Get out! Can't do that!" Garrett stepped inside, the others following. "See, word reached our Alpha that you've been sheltered by some rogue Alpha who thinks he can claim what we discarded." "I'm not yours to claim," Lyra spat. "You banished me. Remember?" "Oh, we remember." Garrett's smile widened. "But we've changed our minds. Turns out our Alpha's decided he wants you back after all. You and the bastard cub." "No." The word tore from Lyra. "No, you can't. We can do whatever we want." Garrett lunged forward, grabbing Lyra's arm. Kira screamed. Lyra fought, clawing at Garrett's face, but he backhanded her hard enough to send her sprawling. "Mama!" Kira tried to run to her, but another wolf caught the cub, lifting her by the scruff of her neck. "No, let her go!" "Ah, she's just a child." "Should have thought of that before you spread your legs for a rogue," Garrett sneered. "Now you're both coming back, and that rogue Alpha who took you in, he's going to learn what happens when you mess with Silverpine Pack property." The door crashed open again. Cale stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees. He took in the scene with one glance, Lyra on the floor, bleeding from her split lip. Kira held by the scruff, whimpering in fear. And his eyes went black. Not gold anymore. Black. Pure Alpha fury. "Put her down." Each word was a death sentence. The wolf holding Kira actually whimpered and dropped her. Kira ran to Kyle, and he caught her, setting her behind him in one smooth motion. Then he looked at Garrett, and the beta actually took a step back. "You made a mistake coming here," Kyle said, voice deadly calm. Garrett tried to rally, puffing out his chest. "We're Silverpine Pack. We came to reclaim our—" "She's not yours." Cale's voice was soft as falling snow and twice as cold. "She hasn't been yours since the moment you threw her away to die." "We're taking them back," Garrett insisted. "And there's nothing you can—" Cale moved. One moment he was standing by the door. The next, he had Garrett by the throat, lifted off the ground. "You're not taking anyone," Cale said quietly. "You're going to leave, now, before I forget myself and paint these walls with your blood." The other Silverpine wolves shifted nervously. "Do you know who I am?" Garrett choked out. "I don't care who you are." Kyle's grip tightened. "I care that you put your hands on her. On them. Ah, that's enough." He threw Garrett across the cabin. The beta crashed into the table, shattering it. "Get out." Cale's voice was thunder. "All of you. And tell your alpha that if any Silverpine wolf comes within 10 miles of this cabin again, I'll consider it an act of war." "You can't threaten us," one of the wolves protested. "We have rights. You have nothing." Kale's eyes flashed. "She was yours once. You cast her out. You left her to die. That severed every bond, every right you think you have." He looked at Lyra, still on the floor, and something in his expression softened. "She's mine now. They both are. Under my protection, my claim, my name. And if you want to challenge that, then by all means." He bared his teeth in a smile that was all predator. "Stay." The Silverpine wolves looked at each other, then at Garrett, still groaning on the floor. Slowly, they began backing toward the door. "This isn't over," Garrett spat, blood on his teeth. "Our alpha can come himself if he has a problem." Kale's voice was ice. "I'll be waiting." The Silverpine wolves fled. The cabin fell silent except for Kira's quiet sobs and Lyra's ragged breathing. Kale turned to them, and his fury melted away, replaced by concern. He knelt beside Lyra, careful not to touch her without permission. "Are you hurt?" Lyra's hand went to her split lip. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Kyle's jaw clenched. "I shouldn't have left you alone. I should have—" "You couldn't have known they'd come." "I should have." His voice was rough with self-recrimination. "I should have protected you better." Kira threw herself at Kale, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "You did protect us," she whispered. "You saved us again." Kyle closed his eyes, one arm coming up to hold the cub close. Over Kira's head, his gaze met Lyra's. "What I said to them," he said quietly. "About you being mine. About my claim. I shouldn't have said it without asking. You're not property. You're not—" "I know what I am," Lyra interrupted. Her heart was pounding. "And I know what you are." She stood slowly, Kyle rising with her. "You said we were under your protection. Your claim. Your name." Her voice shook. "Did you mean it?" Kale's throat worked. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." Lyra took a shaky breath. "Then I accept." Kyle went very still. "Lyra, I accept your claim, your protection, your name." She met his eyes. "All of it. You don't have to. This isn't a debt you owe. I know." Lyra stepped closer. "But I want to. For Kira. For—" she swallowed. "For me." Something blazed in Kale's eyes. "Do you understand what you're saying?" "I'm saying yes," Lyra's voice steadied. "If you'll have us, truly have us. Not just shelter us, but—" She couldn't finish. The words were too big, too terrifying. But Kale understood. His hand came up, cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "I would be honored," he said, voice rough with emotion, "to call you mine, both of you." Kira squealed with joy. And Lyra felt something break open in her chest. Not fear, not pain. Hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope. Kale leaned down, forehead resting against hers. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered. "Both of you. I swear it." "I know," Lyra whispered back, and for the first time in her life, she believed it. Epilogue. Home spring came to the borderlands like a promise. The snow melted. Green shoots pushed through the earth. Birds returned to the trees. And in a small cabin in the woods, a family grew. Kale and Lyra's mating ceremony was simple, just the three of them under the full moon. Kale's mark on Lyra's throat, and her scent mingling with his. Kira had cried with happiness. "We're a real family now," she'd whispered. "We've always been a family," Kale had replied, lifting her onto his shoulders. "Now we're just making it official." Word spread through the borderlands of the rogue Alpha, who'd claimed and abandoned Omega and her cub. Some called it foolish, others called it weak. But when the Silverpine Pack sent warriors to challenge Kale's claim, they returned with their tails between their legs and stories of an Alpha who fought like death itself. After that, no one challenged him again. Lyra had offered her cub for a blanket, prepared to damn herself to save her daughter. Instead, she'd found an Alpha who saw worth where her own pack had seen trash. She'd found a home where the world had offered only cold. She'd found love where she'd expected only survival. One morning, Lyra stood in the doorway, watching Kyle teach Kira to track in the forest. The cubs' laughter rang through the trees like bells. Kale looked back at Lyra and smiled. A rare thing, but growing more common. "Coming?" he called. "In a moment," Lyra called back, hand resting on her still flat belly where new life grew. A second cub. Kyle's cub. She hadn't told him yet. Wanted to wait for the right moment. But as she watched him with Kira, watched the gentleness in his hands and the love in his eyes, Lyra knew there was no wrong moment. Not anymore. Because they were home. All of them. And home was no longer a place where she begged for warmth. It was a place where warmth was freely given, where love was not a transaction, but a gift, where an alpha king, because that's what he'd been once, she'd learned, before grief had driven him into exile, had looked at a desperate Omega and her dying cub and said, no one should have to trade themselves for their child's life. And then he'd given them everything, not for a night, but forever. Lyra smiled, touched her belly once more, then walked into the forest to join her family. Ease behind her, the cabin stood warm and welcoming. A home. Their home. Built not from stone and wood, but from kindness, protection, and love. And in the end, that was worth more than all the blankets in the world.